Okay. Can we get started, please? Okay. Calm down, please. Let's get started with the lecture. Okay, so today's topic is mainly focused on long-term memory, but I may also say we will refer back to short-term memory a couple of times. Okay, so we'll start right now. So the first question I want to answer is, how does information actually get into long-term memory? Short-term memory. So, as a very brief recap, we have seen last time that there are a couple of memories in sensory stores. So, sensory stores are the ones that hold information only briefly in terms of milliseconds, like the echoic or iconic memories. Then last time we spoke in detail about short-term memory, and we see that short-term memory has a very limited capacity, and information is highly accessible, it fades away, it goes away quickly, and on the other hand, the name also says keeps information over very long periods of time, possibly a lifetime, and also it is assumed that it has potentially an unlimited capacity. So that would be so let's go to the first question. How does information get into long-term memory? And when we refer back to the models last week, we had this modal model, and in their model, basically, if information wants to get into the long-term store, it has to go through short-term memory. And there are still some models today that would say, okay, we need to go through short-term memory to get into long-term memory. And this is probably also the most common route. However, if you look at the military store model of Cohen, then we see, well, actually, there is no memory. Memory is just the active portion of long-term memory. So encoding would directly into long-term memory information, and not through short-term. And current view is basically both, that information critically gets into long-term memory by first going into short-term memory by passing. However, it has also been shown that information can be encoded directly into long-term memory. With respect to the model, we don't go into any more detail. It's important to know or remember that we don't need this short-term storage always. I would like to start with a little bit of a long demonstration now. And unfortunately, I somehow forgot, or we're not really able to get sweets for this time, for the break. So instead, we will make a little challenge out of that. So really try to be competitive, try to be the best of all. And the winner gets a little gift here. And let's see who has the best memory performance after all. So please, no cheating. If you get maximum points, I will somehow assume that you cheated, because I think it's really difficult. Okay, so please try to follow the instructions really closely. Otherwise the demonstration doesn't work. Okay? So I will show you in a moment 15 names of enemies, random names, without any that. And I would like you to try to remember these names by a process typically used when you have to learn stuff from school, university, and this is basically rote rehearsal. If you ever were so stupid like me and chose to learn Latin, and you have this learning of vocabulary or stuff where you just engage like a new phone number or something. This approach is just rehearsing it in your. Okay, I will give you 3 minutes for this, and PowerPoint only allows automatic slide transition for 1 minute, so I have to time that using my phone. Okay. And so, are you ready? Then minute to go. Write down all the don't do it individually, not as a team effort or group effort. Everybody finished with writing down? Okay, who had 15? Really? That's good. Okay, let's go to the second part. So quite a few. Okay, yeah, okay. So these are the ones, sorry, if you want to double check, these are the ones. And then you can And please, okay, just wait a second, guys. Please write down how many you got right. Write it down on your sheet, okay? Okay. Now, let's go to the second part of the demonstration. So this was the first bit. And now I would like to ask you to remember 15 names of cities. Okay? However, this time I would like you to ask to employ a different strategy of, can you please quiet? How to remember the information. And this time, try to work with the information. And I leave that to you, what works best to you. Just to give you some examples. See the city names. You can think about, okay, what do I know about the city? Can I link it to some facts in my memory? Do I know which continent or country it is? Can you create the map of the world in front of you and get a pattern of the cities, for instance, with your visual track? You can try to imagine, okay, this city, how does it look like? Do you know a landmark of that city or something like that? So really try to work with that. You can also try to link the items. For instance, come up with a story or a travel plan or something like that. This is somehow not this simple rote rehearsal, but instead try to work and to process the information. Okay? Good. So again, 3 minutes. Okay, even if some people don't want to engage in this practice, can you please be quiet for the ones who do want to do the practice, the demonstration? 2 minutes to go. Quiet, please. city names. Please compare and again write down the number, how many you were able to recall. Okay, so can I please get your attention? So there is now a poll everywhere active, and please fill out the poll, but please, can I please have your attention? Be honest. So some people may have used kind of a mnemonic strategy already in the first round and try to create a story with the animals or something like that. If you've done so, that's all right, but please then don't participate in the poll, okay? Please only do that if you really just try to rehearse it in the first round. So enter in poll everywhere how your performance was. And it asks how many more animals or cities you had as compared to the other category. So one category was better than that. Tendency that more animals were remembered than cities. Really unexpected. So I did that for the first time. And usually, as we'll see in a moment, the prediction would be that you would have remembered more cities. But maybe look into that. Let's look into that. What may be potential reasons for that. So can I ask, if you sum up your both memory scores, who got 30 in total, 15 in each? Raise your hands really high. Okay, so because I then count for 29, all the 30 ones now get this, and now I have to be very careful. These are erasers, which are brain-shaped. But if I go to a very literal translation from German to English eraser, I would say rubber. So I don't hand out rubbers in lectures. So should I say that? Then it was an accident, okay? So all 30 people pick up their hands, pass it around, pick an eraser. Okay, another tip. You are free. Hello, can we a bit quiet, please? Can you, very important for the ones with the erasers, don't use them in an exam and as help. The exact anatomy is really not that accurate, so actually it's utterly wrong. Okay. So, I think these things can be passed around quietly. Now this question which we just dealt with is basically about, can you please be quiet now? Okay, thank you. So, it's about the encoding of information. And as we have seen, the standard strategy for memorizing is rehearsal, as you may have experienced from school or something like that. However, if you do a classical short memory recall test, where you had to memorize 4-digit numbers, like 493, and they rehearsed the number in their short-term memory. And there were different trials. Sometimes they had to rehearse that in their mind for 2 minutes, for 6, 8 minutes. So different durations of rehearsal, and then they had to report the number back. In total, there were 64 trials, each among the 3 different durations. And at the end of the session, what the participants did not know in advance is that at the end of the session, they had to reproduce all the numbers they had in the whole session. So this now had to come from long-term memory. And the question is, if rehearsal is sufficient to get information to a long-term memory, you would expect in this example, people who rehearse for 20 seconds better recalled than those numbers. However, what they found is there were no differences. So recall performance is independent of the time duration you do the rehearsal. In particular, where you don't plan to encode it into long-term memory. So mere rehearsal is not sufficient for memory. So how does information get into long-term memory otherwise? So as I said, the repetition is not sufficient. And there is in the textbook by Dante, human memory, I think he tells a story of a priest who in his family every evening for dinner he recited a prayer from the Bible. He read it out every night, basically for decades. And later on he was asked to recite it without a book. He was not able to, although he had read this thing for thousands of times. So repetition is just not sufficient to get information. So what else then? The initial exercise demonstration took much longer than expected, so we will skip this called everywhere thing here. So an alternative in the 1970s is called depth of processing. And you will notice that you can see where I was aiming at with the 2 demonstrations. And depth of processing theory states that the deeper we process information, the stronger our memory traces become. That we are having that for a long time. And they distinguish types of rehearsal. The first one is the maintenance rehearsal, which we just do to keep us in in our short-term memory. And that is what I would have hoped we did with the Eyewitness. And then I call it elaborative rehearsal. And here you do a deeply semantic processing of the information encoded in long-term memory. And what they claim, and there's quite good evidence for that, is that only this elaborative rehearsal results in long-term memory. Now, this is quite relevant for you as well when you learn for exams. And that's a reason why people try to encourage you to not only just passively read something, but actually to engage with the information, to work with it. When you want to cheat an exam, you're often, at least in the old times, when we didn't have these fancy smartphones, you would write a little piece of paper. And you try to squeeze in all the information on that size. And that actually is not a bad thing to do, writing something, because you really have to think about the information and think, how can I reduce the information to just this little space that I can squeeze it on there? So you really have to actively work with it. However, obviously, you're just writing it, but then leave it at home, because otherwise okay, so if you really want to learn something, try to get as deep as possible in terms of working with the information. There are quite a few studies which support the theory, and one of the seminal early studies was of the following nature. So in every trial, participants saw a word. They just had to do the task of that word. They were not aware that it was actually a memory study. And for example, in one trial, it may have been the word book. And they had to make different types of judgments on these words they saw. So it could be on a more visual feature. So for instance, does the word start with a capital letter or not? Simple yes, no. You actually don't need to read the word for it to do that. It's a very shallow level of processing. Next thing is that they asked about the phonological structure of the word. So for instance, does the word rhyme with look? In the example of book, yes, it does. So for that you have to actually read the word, you have to pronounce it in your head. This is like an intermediate level of processing. And finally, they asked a question to participants who actually work with the semantics. And they did this by asking whether the words they saw would fit the following sentence. I am going to read this example book. Makes sense. You would answer yes. And another example, you would say no, it doesn't make sense. I like to drive my doesn't make sense. And so this is the deepest level of processing. And at the end of the session, as I said, participants were not aware that they will be asked for these words. They were not trying to encode them or memorize them. And in the end, they did an unexpected recognition task. Recognition task means they showed all the words in the experiment, plus probably the same number of words which were not in the experiment. They just had to say, yes, I saw this word before, or not. They found that the performance was best at the deep level, intermediate level of processing work. So this shows that it's encoding better and better with deeper encoding of information. These findings suggest another thing, and that is that long-term memory actually stores the information, verbal information, semantically. Does somebody remember how short-term memory stores verbal information? Oh, yes, please. Acoustically, yes. I was now seriously doubting myself. 2 weeks ago, we went through this in great length, saw a lot of studies. So short-term memory is acoustic coding, phonological coding. If you remember the word length effect, how long does it take to speak the word, acoustic confusion, these things. Long-term memory, on the other hand, so there are, of course, further studies to support this idea of semantic encoding, and let's have a look at one of them. And here, participants learned word lists for long-term storage. So they were really asked to store them for a longer time. And later on, they had a recognition test, like before, asking, did you see this word before or not? So you had non-targets in there, which they haven't seen before. And these non-targets were either completely dissimilar words to the target words, or there were words which sounded similarly, so they had phonological similarity, or they were semantically similar without being phonologically similar. And in this task, which relied on long-term memory, what you find is that only the semantically similar words caused confusion to that. So radiator and heater may confuse you. If you learn radiator and then in the recall test heater, you may say, oh yeah, I've seen it. Okay. So to summarize, the deeper the information is processed, the better it is stored in long-term memory. And yeah, the implications I already mentioned that, so don't cram in information by mere rehearsal and repetition, and instead work with the information. And yeah, try to think through it, ask questions, even if you don't have an answer to the question. It may still remember you in an exam or so about the things you know. Do you have any questions? So let's go to long-term memory. And today I would actually like to present 2 video clips to introduce you to the topic.
When they turned up his cards, they were blank.
Number 2, the Bourne franchise.
I can't remember anything that happened before 2 weeks ago.
Okay. So, from that snippet, probably most of you know that movie. What can we learn about memory, in particular long-term memory? They even touched upon that in the description. Yes. So there are different types of long-term memory, and the one which is affected is the semantic memory or episodic memory, or the common term would be a declarative memory for that. Does anybody know how the other type of memory is called and what that stores? Yes, that's procedural memory. Yes, like the actions, his martial arts abilities, they were still intact. And that's indeed something which we really find in patients, that you can distinguish between these 2 memory types. Okay, let's have...
Must be cancer.
Turn on. Good morning. I don't think. Answer the question, does it count as the friend zone if she doesn't even remember who you are?
I think he's more than my friend. You're my boyfriend, right?
Yes, ma'am.
He plays a womanizer who gets bitten by the love bug when he falls for Lucy.
That was a very loaded word.
She's a young woman whose short-term memory loss keeps her thinking that it's always October 13th, 2002. This is ridiculous. Over. While Sandler's character is completely smitten and will do anything to win her over, Lucy begins each new day with a clean slate. However, just because she can't remember it doesn't mean she doesn't eventually fall in love with Sandler's character, which makes her.
I was so nervous to come here and meet the guy that makes me fall in love with him every day.
I just added 2 more guys.
Okay, this is a different type of amnesia. Okay. So we have this one. It's all actually long-term memory loss. It's not short-term in the movie. What's different? And if you want to describe that to access to long-term memory and things, yes. So basically, she can't store anything new into long-term memory. So she has the short-term memory available, as you can see in the film, because it's not like 5 minutes later she doesn't recognize her. It's the next morning she doesn't recognize her. So, different types of amnesia. I know I have it briefly on the screen. Do you know the different types? Sorry?
Retrograde amnesia.
Retrograde amnesia, and 2 of the 2 have retrograde. This one? No. It has retrograde. And anterograde amnesia. So retrograde means you can't access what is in your past, but you can form new memories. And anterograde is you can access what's in the past, like for her, she doesn't have memory loss, but she can't form new memories. So, but we don't go into that part, that's more biological, and you will cover that there. But this is not too description of the different types of amnesia we can illustrate the working of the long-term memory system. Okay, so as you'll see, there's a lot of different types of memory, and therefore we have the need for a little bit of structure and taxonomy. And just for an overview, we will see now a lot of different types of maybe long-term memory, but we won't go through all of them today. So the first is declarative, and declarative is subdivided into semantic memory, which is about facts, and episodic memory, which is about events and our personal past. Then we have non-declarative memory. So this is defective in both of our protagonists in different ways. And then we have non-declarative memory, which is then like skills, like knowing how to do. But there are further categories, for instance, priming and perceptual learning. If you do a task where you have to decide whether a bar on the screen has slightly tilted or not, you will see that you become better with that task by time. And it has been shown that as early as primary visual cortices are plastic and modify their workings and allow a better fine-tuning of that. Also, like non-declarative learning. Classical conditioning, Pavlov's dog, is non-declarative long-term memory, these type of associations. Then we have further forms of non-associative learning. It's been further subdivided. We will focus today basically on declarative memory and very briefly on this. Bilingualism, or generally language. Language is procedural. both languages, no matter whether it's first or second. So that, well, yeah, depends. It's probably bridging the gap between the two, because you also may have explicit knowledge of the vocabulary, which then falls into the category. Good question. By language, I don't know whether it's somehow the knowledge. Yeah, usually it must be, because even the very severe people with amnesia, they don't usually lose the ability to speak, so they don't lose their vocabulary or something. There are obviously, but I don't know whether they are considered to be amnesia. It's more than aphasement. So let's start with a very brief overview of the category of declarative before we then go into the two sub. So declarative memory refers to knowledge about facts. It's called semantic memory, episodic memory. And one feature of that memory is that our recall is conscious. If we try to recall a name of somebody, we are consciously aware of it. And that's different to procedural memory, where it's typically unconscious. When we start to ride a bike, it's not that we consciously think, okay, I have to lean slightly more leftwards to keep balance or something. And because recall is conscious, it's sometimes also called explicit memory, while procedural memory is sometimes called implicit. Let's look at the terminology. Okay. The information which we recall from long-term memory, that is then stored in our short-term. And from there we can use it, for instance, for further manipulations. So the number tables, for instance, which we learn in school, they are in long-term memory. And then if we have to retrieve how much 5 plus 5 is, short-term memory, and with the result we can go on and work and do further things. Okay, so much just for the overview, and now a little bit more time on the semantic, on the facts. Semantic memory, as I said, stores general knowledge about the world. However, that covers really a lot of different things, so we can find some structure here as well. So the first things are facts, which we store. So this is very basic. Then something more complex, and this develops during life development and by experience, we develop concepts. And the kind of highest category which we speak about are skills. We will speak about all of them in a moment. So let's start with facts. Facts are really quite simple. Basically, the most basic units of our semantic memory. And it is, for instance, that we know as a fact London is in England. So, our memory maybe as raw as temporary. You meet somebody and they tell you their name, maybe that you hear it once and you remember it. Not necessarily every name we hear, but okay, let's have a look at the next more complex level of memory structures, which are called concepts. Is basically our mental representation of categories of objects or items. And that may sound now very complicated, but what is meant by that actually is that we, for instance, have the concept of a tree, which we have learned by experience. The concept allows us to go out into the woods and basically on any continent, in every, to the rainforest, and we see a tree that we've never seen before in our whole life, but we immediately usually recognize it as a tree. Same thing for furniture. It's easy to recognize chairs, for instance. You can find exemplars which deviate so much from our concept that we find it difficult to identify. If you think of certain types of designer chairs, if you would be located at some place where you can't identify it. You don't know what that object is. So the concept is basically a generalized, simplified form for a category of objects. So, and the crucial thing is that this is one of the prerequisites also for higher level thinking. Because we can think in categories. We can speak of trees and things like that. And you can, this example is a very concrete thing, a tree, you see it. However, the same idea holds also for abstract concepts. For instance, the concept of freedom, with a generic idea of what freedom is, and combine a lot of different things, like freedom, prison or free, freedom of choice, or things like that. So then the next complex memory structure called schemas. And schemas are organized memory structures which organize categories of information, such as concepts and the relationships among them. Again, horribly complicated definition, but the example will hopefully make it clear. So it's basically an organized packet of information, which may be about the world, about people, or events. And an example would be that we just have seen that we may have the concept of trees, and when we speak about a forest, that's possibly more a schema of things, because it organizes how the different concepts, and the concepts of the trees, plants, and animals, how they relate to each other. So trees need to be within a certain vicinity to say that it's a forest. If each tree is a mile apart, it's a forest, for instance. And we have certain ideas about animals. So basically, the schema is a higher level organizational structure. These schemas, like the forest, are built on past experience. And they're very important because they help us to organize our perception. And we actually work a lot with these schemas without being conscious of them. So there was a study to illustrate that, real experience. And in that study, participants were invited to participate in an experiment. And they arrived in the lab, and they were first put into an office, and were said, okay, please wait here for a moment until we are ready. And then they came and said, okay, now we are ready. Put them into the next room, and then they said, okay, you've just sat in a room and waited for, let's say, 5 minutes. What items were in the room? And now the people reported the items they saw. And the interesting thing is, they were clearly sitting in an office. So what happened very often is that they reported items which are very typical for an office, but which were actually on purpose not there. For instance, there was no telephone. But this is a standard thing in an office. So a lot of people would write down, I saw a telephone. So this is really important because the people actually do believe that. Because they just use the schema, okay, I was sitting in an office, to shape their perception. Now think about eyewitness testimony. If people are asked, was this item there or not, they do believe it. They are not able to say, yeah, now I think I was sitting in an office, so I assume there was a telephone or something like that. They just think, yeah, there was a telephone. So it's very important for everyday life that schemas, we have to be aware of them. In the same way, the schemas are often used in the process of language comprehension because we make a lot of implicit assumptions based on what I just said. Okay, so that was a schema, and that is kind of the highest level of organizational structure we speak about today. And a script is basically a schema for events. So in another way of words, that it is a sequence of expected behavior for a given situation. And a very classic and traditional example that is often used in the literature is restaurant dining. A very typical script could be something like you enter the restaurant, you will be given the menu, unless you're at McDonald's or something. You have to order food and drink, then you eat and you drink, you pay the bill, and you leave the restaurant. Of course, you can have further subdivisions, a higher level of detail, but I think the idea is right. So that you have this implicit idea of what you have to do. And this also can result in some more or less funny misunderstandings. People visit different countries, and the scripts in these countries are different. To stay in this example, in some countries it's absolutely obligatory that you wait at the entrance and the waiter brings you to your table. In other countries, this is rarely done. You have to find a free table yourself. So you can see the misunderstandings. In some countries, the tourists will just walk somewhere and offend the waiters. In other countries, they will stand there. Nobody will think these rude waiters, they will ignore you. And so these scripts actually are also quite relevant for our everyday. So to summarize that, facts, lowest level, most basic units. Concepts, categories of things. Schemas, they organize pieces of information in their relationships, go higher and higher. Scripts are then schemas. As I already said, they are critically essential for understanding. For instance, eyewitness memory or language processing. So before we go to the, we'll have a break of, let's keep it short to 5 minutes, okay? And as I said, sorry for not having seats today. Okay, so we now have spoken about declarative memory and the semantic, the fact side of things. Now we come to the episodic memory, and that may be a little bit of a little bit more interest to some people of you, because one big part of that is eyewitness testimony. And we'll speak about this as well. But let's start a little bit more generic as an introduction. So, episodic memory is memory for events. So basically events which we have experienced for ourselves. Episodic memory is not about if you tell me a story about your last summer holiday and I remember that. That for me will be factual memory, but for you it will be semantic memory, but for you it will be episodic memory. We can situate it in time and space. We know, okay, it was roughly at that time and that place, which is not the case for semantic memory. We don't remember when and where we learned that London is in England. So the generic category of episodic memory has a specific subclass which is often treated slightly separately, and this is autobiographical. And this is memory for personal experiences which are very important for our life. And this can be a lot of things. It can be like first date, first kiss, a birth of a child, but also an accident we had, the loss of a family member or some friend, something like that. So more higher impact events, so to say. And it has been shown that these type of events have a somewhat distinct features, for instance, about how we forget them, at which time course and rate, and things like that. Now, Endel Talving is probably the person to mention in the context of episodic memory, because he basically coined the term in the early 1970s. And he made a distinction between knowing, so where we say, oh yeah, I know that, so which is factual, and in the terminology we have been using so far, semantic, and remembering, where he said it's a feeling that is located in the past. It's episodic memory according to the terminology. That's the difference. We know something, or we remember that. So let's have a look at the characteristics of episodic memory, and they boil down to this concept of remembering some event. So you have a subject who spends time, and if you read the Bible, you remember something. It's a little bit like a mental time travel. You may close your eyes and go back to that time. Oh yeah, my first kiss. It was like that, it was smelling nice. We have a strong connection to ourselves, because our own personal memory feels different than this. The mode or modality, that's a little bit of mixed information. It's often in the form of visual images as the primary form, but at the same time, it often is a very holistic experience where we also, when it's intense, remember other things like the smell, the temperature, or how we felt, things like that. And it is also subject to very, very rapid forgetting. Because what you have to remember is that episodic memory is really about everything in our life. So you probably remember what you had for breakfast this morning. Who can remember what I had for breakfast the morning before? Yesterday. 3 days ago. I mean, some of you I know have the same thing every morning. That is obvious. But you know what I mean. Most people wouldn't be able to say what they had 4 or 5 days ago. We could do the same thing maybe for dinner or lunch or something like that. Which type of sandwich did you have 5 days ago? So that shows you. And this is just not overload our system. We don't need that information, so we can get rid of it. Okay, as you can see, this type of memory is very, very important for eyewitness testimony. And again, a very big name, Elizabeth Loftus. She really got this research on eyewitness testimony started. And the critical point is that eyewitness testimony is typically acceptable evidence of crimes. So the accuracy of a memory may decide on the fate of other people. And therefore, there's quite a high relevance to that. And there are a couple of questions associated with it. Are the memories stable or not? Can they be modified in terms of just by accident or being inept? You ask the wrong question and deduce maybe something, or maybe even on purpose, that we want the person to say something specific. So, Loftus, one of the early studies, investigate how questions, or investigate whether can change the answers. So all participants viewed the same short video clip of a car accident. And then they were asked about what they did see. And different groups of participants received slightly different questions. Group A was asked, how fast were the cars when they smashed into each other? And Group B was asked, how fast were they when they hit each other? Of course, the italic for the participants, they didn't know there were any other conditions. So the people were asked about the speed of the car. One group with this wording, one group with that wording. Hot everywhere. What do you think the results of that study were? Oh, sorry. Now, yeah. Okay, so do you know the study? Okay. Well, some people say yes, some people say no. Yeah. So, yes, smashed result in higher ratings. However, for that, you have to keep in mind, both words are not wrong. They both describe the incident. And if you think that a wording can actually influence the speed rating, how do you actually ask without any influence? So it's really a very challenging task to phrase without any form of influence on the witness. Because you may say, well, hit is perfectly normal word to ask. Okay, so another example where even a slight difference can make a difference. Again, a movie in a car accident is shown, and this movie doesn't contain any broken handles. And then two different groups of people. One was asked, have you seen the broken handle, right? And the other one has been asked, have you seen the broken handle? It's clear that implies that there was a leaves it more open, and consequently, the broken headline yielding more. So you can see these tiny changes induce certain types of answers. Okay, so what do these studies show? They basically show that when we recall information from our long-term memory, then the answer we give may be influenced or affected by the way the question is phrased. However, what we should be aware of is not necessarily an indication of, let's say, false memories or manipulation or something like that. It may be that participants, maybe explicitly or implicitly, if they can't remember correctly, but they then use information from the question to give their answer. So if you have to guess, basically, what do you guess? And then you may be drawn to one or the other.
It's a fair prediction then to say that in the first experiment done, because you have no absolute information on it, that the incidence of, or the effect size of the manipulation should be that the more information you actually present that's salient in the original trial should affect the effect size.
Yes, that's a prediction you could make, probably, yes. I don't know. What there was okay.
How is it working?
Okay, so, yeah, what I mean here is not necessarily that case. So, if people are unsure, then, or maybe, I don't know. Let's just do quickly through that. I would have to look that up myself. Okay, so the question now is whether memory can also be, let's say, more modified in a more subtle way. And this brings us to the next study, and that study has a little bit more complicated design. We'll go through that in the Loftus study. And participants are seeing a series of slides, and where a car was stopping at either a stop sign or a yield sign. I use the terminology here, publication. So basically, it's So that's the crucial calculation. One group of participants saw this, the other group saw that. Okay, so participants engaged in quite a few activities. And one of the activities was to answer a couple of questions. And what they now got a question as an example: did another car pass the red dash while it was stopped at the stop or yield sign? Some participants were stopped, the other participants were yield. The crucial manipulation is that what was given here in the question was either consistent or inconsistent with what they have seen. Another thing which is relevant here, for the question itself, it really doesn't matter. They could just say while it was stopped at the sign. The question is, did another car pass while it stopped there? So it's not as if the participants really have to think about this or something. It's just the additional information. So spend 20 minutes completing an task. So any effects we see now really cannot be short-term memory. They must have been long-term. And finally, fourth choice recognition test. Sign, the other one with a stop sign. You're asked, what did you see before? Now, generally, people who saw the stop sign would say, yes, I've seen the stop sign. However, the group who saw the stop sign but then had yield time in question had a higher proportion of people who actually say, I saw the yield sign. So, although the effects may not be tremendously huge, you see that it can sway people. And please also remember that we have two visual images. And we just had some irrelevant semantic information 20 minutes ago, half an hour ago, packed into a series of questions. And that, in this case, really modified the memory in a way that people now say, oh no, I saw that. So again, illustrating how careful one has to be in ways of questioning. And play narrate or something and may contain slightly wrong information that the participants. So they remember something they actually have never seen, because this group never saw the wheels, they only saw the stop sign. I think that was clear. It's basically going through it once again in a more illustrative view. Okay, so there's obviously, for its high impact, a lot of research on eyewitness, which basically shows that we can be influenced by information and alter memory and induce. There are studies where they have shown and argued that you can induce like new false memories into your system. Something like, oh yeah, don't you remember you have been on an air balloon trip? Something, or a balloon ride as a child. And at some point people actually started into that. The question, of course, is these are all laboratory studies. And the material to the participants is not really of very high relevance. They're just participating in a study. However, eyewitnesses are much more attention drawing, fighting, emotions involved. So how good is the transfer? And there are studies which were along the lines of actually asking witnesses of crimes or accidents about their memory, how accurate they are. So, in this example, in this study, it was done on witnesses where there was a shop robbery, and during that robbery, the robber and So it was really a very intense event for the witnesses. And what do you think, how good the memory of these witnesses was several months later? And if I find it, I would go to Point Everywhere, activate, and just generally, would you say it's rather inaccurate, like the memory that we have seen in the Loftus studies, or would you say probably rather accurate because it was such a high emotionally related event? Okay, 40% rather inaccurate, 50% rather accurate. In this case, the majority is right. So what has to show is if you have these high emotional events, then typically your memory is really good and accurate. So a conclusion at this point in time seems to be that our normal memories are rather fragile and maybe are prone to be distorted by conflicting information. However, emotionally loaded memory are less sensitive to that, which does not mean they are absolutely robust and immune or something, but they're a bit more stable to that. I don't know, to be honest, and I'm not sure how PTSD relates to memory in general, whether I would have thought intuitively that in general terms, I mean maybe not for the event, but afterwards it probably more impairs your memory without being sure. But about the event itself, maybe that they have a very good recollection of that, and they suffer from flashbacks going back to these memories and so forth. There is a concept which is called flashbulb memory for these events which are very surprising and suddenly coming and without warning, someone is shot in front of you or something. There was some discussion where they have a specific quality to them, but it seems that they behave like rather normal, intense memories, so that this is not an extra category of that.
I would have thought that an emotional event, that your memory is focused on how you feel rather than the facts of the event. So I would have thought that your long-term, your memory of that event, you wouldn't necessarily remember because you're wrapped up in your emotions.
Well, research seems to suggest something different, and I mean, it may be argued in the sense of that where is your attention drawn, and if we remember the attentional lecture, we usually don't encode what we don't attend to. So it may be that for certain types of information that may be the case, but what they investigated here was like relevant information, like how did the murderer look like or stuff, and not, for instance, well, what type of sweets were on the shelf or so, where you may be actually worse because you focused so much on the incident, but because you focused on the incident and a high emotional experience not necessarily prevents the encoding into memory. So it was about factual knowledge and not about how they felt or something, because it was in the context of asking about how valid is such information or eyewitness testimony for trials. So, and that's the relevant part of information. Okay. Yes.
Is this related in any way to the fact that some very brief but traumatic episodes like a car crash can tend to be remembered in almost like slow motion, high level detail? Like what? Sorry. In almost like slow motion replay, because there's a very high level of detail in the memory.
An accident without head injury where you suffer from memory loss or something, because that is often happening something as well, that you have this like blackout and you can't remember the incident before that. Possibly. Very specific answer. Okay. Any further questions? Yes.
Do you know if the emotional salience has to be encoded in the first instance, or if you had an event and then it became emotionally salient post-fact, would that also mean that it was the same? And thus, is it about the rehearsal process throughout, or is it about the encoding in the original instance?
I don't know, but I would speculate that the emotional state at the point of encoding, but it's not the encoding, unless it's really about like half a minute later or something, or a minute later, but probably not like a week later or something.
There's the contrary there, that most people can remember what they were doing when 9/11 occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an associating of an event's global significance with your personal circumstances.
Yes. So, and then you can see that, for instance, in these examples, it's more accurate than any other day from these times. Okay, so let's move on. We have two things to cover. We don't have to, but I would like to cover two more things today. And one is when we now take time a little bit into consideration. And what we've spoken so far, these type of memories, when along the time axis, we are here in cases of the past. However, could you think of any memory which may be in the future? Yes. We can't set ourselves up to say, oh, I have to do this stuff tomorrow. I have to return a book. I want to watch the TV show tomorrow night. Anybody knows what that memory is called? It's called prospective. So this is retrospective memory about the past, and this is about memory in quotation marks for the future. This is called prospective memory. So just very briefly, I don't want to spend too much time on that. It's our ability to set ourselves up to remember something in the future. Like I will call you tomorrow, or next time I will now read the book. Some people consider it to be declarative because it is also conscious. We really set ourselves up to that, and then we remember effectively, oh yes, I have to return the book now. There are basically two types of prospective memory, and that distinction is by what triggers our action. It can be event-based. So, for instance, if I am at the library, I will return the book. If not, then I will not. Or next time at Pizza Express, I will eat the pizza margarita, for instance. Or they can be time-based. It's an actual time. So I will call you tomorrow at 4 p.m. So we may have to fine-tune our internal timing, and check the time. And roughly you will see, okay, now it's afternoon, I have to call that person. Any questions on that very brief bit? It's not too complicated, at least when we stay on that level. So the last part for today is about forgetting, the mechanism of forgetting. And here we will now also first refer back to short-term memory to last week. So forgetting about memories in our past. And we are speaking about forgetting in declarative memory. We are not speaking about forgetting in procedural memory, for instance, that we unlearn in mind. So let's start with short-term memory. Recall task, as we spoke last week about enough. Task was remember single trigrams, for instance, XAJ. And directly afterwards, the participants were asked to count backwards in threes aloud. Anybody remembers what that is for? Why you do that? Not to annoy the participants, not to expose their poor math ability. Yes, to start rehearsal. So that you can use a retention interval where you have to memorize something, but you prevent any rehearsal. Okay. And this counting was done for varying durations, between 3 and 18 seconds, and afterwards a free recall of the items. And what you get then is the following. So this is the duration from 1 second to 18 seconds, and the probability that you recall the items. So after 1 second, it's roughly 80%. So information in your short-term memory, if you cannot rehearse it, roughly 20% has been lost after 1 second. And then you see it goes down, and after 18 seconds, it's maybe 10%. So not very much left. So short-term memory is really short-term memory, unless you use rehearsal. And this curve has been found in many, many studies, and it's called a power function by the type of mathematical equation to model and describe. So forgetting follows a power function. The feature of the power function is that initially you have a very high rate of forgetting, and the longer it is, then it fades out and then the forgetting slows down. There are two theories about forgetting in short-term memory, and these theories are still debated today, and there is evidence for both. So one is the decay theory, and it is very simple and straightforward. If we don't refresh it, information just fades away, because we lose the activity in the neural circuits, maybe some reverberating noise which overlays that, so at some point it becomes indistinguishable from the noise, so it's gone. Another theory is interference theory. And interference theory states that information does not fade. It could stay there forever in principle. However, what happens is that we get interference with either old or new information, or both. And then we can't distinguish it anymore. We get confused and we lose it. There are different types of interference which are very common and often. One is called proactive interference. And this means when I have to learn something right now, then I find it difficult because I have learned already something before. So this is what is here on the right-hand side. First, let's say I had to learn a list of names of, I don't know, women's first names, and then I have to learn a second list. Then the learning, the actual encoding, is more difficult because I already have the other names in my mind. It's difficult to get rid of them. Retroactive interference is the other way around. And that when we learn something, that this actually affects our memory. You have that sometimes in comedy shows or as jokes, where you say, okay, every new bit of information coming in throws out an old bit. It's a little bit that way. So the fact that I know have to learn this name makes it more difficult for me to retrieve that name from my memory. So we have these two different things, proactive and retroactive interference, and the idea is there's no decay. There's these types of interference which makes it just impossible for us to learn certain techniques. And as if we have problems. Okay, this type of interference we just spoke about is mainly based on semantic similarity. So typically, you first have to learn a list of numbers and then a list of letters, then you are not worse in the letters because you learn numbers first. And you don't have any problems retrieving the numbers because you learn them later. However, if you first learn the word list and then a list, the hardest case, of synonyms of these words, then the task becomes extremely difficult to keep that separate, to say, okay, the words which I just learned from this list are not the ones. Okay, so this was short term. Questions on that? So, for getting a long-term memory, quite obvious question is, do we have the same mechanisms of either decay and or interference? And the simple and straightforward answer is, no, we don't have. Long-term memory works differently. Okay, so why do we forget at all in long-term memory? And we touched on it. Forgetting is normal. It's kind of weeding out of the information which we do not need. We usually become aware only of forgetting when information has been forgotten which actually would have been important and which should have not been. But generally speaking, it's a very suppose you would remember everything which you have ever read, the TV program, any brainless magazines, and all that stuff, you would remember that. That would make it very hard to focus on things, to retrieve specific things. So forgetting is normal. And it's useful because it reduces the demands on our memory system. Really, it's about the question whether the information is potentially useful in the future or not. So, having the examples of our breakfast in the morning, suppose at a specific day you had a breakfast where you felt sick afterwards. And this food poisoning avoidance behavior is extremely strong. So it's very likely that you don't forget that for quite a while, that this particular food made you sick. Because that's relevant for the future. Okay. There are two explanations for long-term forgetting. The first one is that the information actually stays in long-term memory. However, what we lose is our ability to access it, so that we can't retrieve it. The second one is that information actually is deleted and really not there. So let's first have a look at the ability to access the information. So what has been shown is, and we're quite sure, to access the contents of our long-term memory, in particular of our semantic and declarative memory, we need retrieval cues, which act like index to find. Let's have an example. Okay, so what memory is accessed in your mind when you get the following retrieval cues? Most people probably got that picture into the mind. That's rather easy task. Now suppose for some reason in your memory you lost the link between mouse and smart to Mickey Mouse. So when I say mouse and smart, it doesn't link there. So all you can use as a retrieval cue is cute and Disney. And that is a wealth of different things you can remember here. So then suddenly you can't access it anymore. However, it doesn't mean that the memory is lost. If I give you a further retrieval cue, for instance, Minnie Mouse, Pluto, Goofy, then you suddenly may be able again to access it. There's a good deal of evidence that at least part of the forgetting is due to that effect. That we just lose certain things and can't use certain cues or words or information to retrieve the information. Theory. So our mental system finds out that a memory is of no use, it can be discarded. So this doesn't typically happen in an immediate and immediately final way, but it kind of is like a slower process which happens here. And it's quite funny, I find it somehow strange, but there is a paradigm in the past which is called intentional forgetting. So you can do long-term memory studies and then instruct participants, please actively forget this information. And then later on they will be actually have less good memory performance for this type of information. To what? What do you mean exactly? Could be associated with that. Although maybe that in the case of repression, the events or the memory of the events is still there, but you somehow restricted access to that. So it may be more a kind of active inhibition. By directed or intentional forgetting, the assumption is it's really gone from your memory. So for instance, in like when we go back to trauma therapy or something, you may try to dig deep and recover the memories where you think, oh no, I can't remember anything of that event. I know that I was abused as a child, but I don't know exactly any details, and you may be able to recover them. Then the memory is still there, but you may have, maybe you were able to delete some retrieval cues so that they don't trigger the memory anymore. And these retrieval cues are really gone, and you may have to use different ones. I don't know the details of that. Okay. So what's the time course of forgetting in long-term memory? And this is just one study which illustrates it a little bit and gives you a little bit idea of the future. In this study, they asked a couple of alumni about their grades during their study times. And some of them finished university 54 years ago. So we are on a slightly different time scale than in short-term memory. Okay. So on this were the results, and what we can do is just focus on the blue solid. The blue solid line is the mean number of correctly recalled grades from the study time, so 16 years. And this is the interval, retention interval in years. That means and what you can see is after like 1 or 2 years, it's like 7. Still quite impressive. But probably you can remember some grades stuck. What is interesting is that if you look at that, it's again a power function. It's a very different time scale, but again, a power function. So forgetting is really ruled by this power function. And there are certain different factors which may impact the time course of that, but typically it is a power function. And it doesn't scale here. Any questions on forgetting? Just Yes.
And a friend of mine who shared the house couldn't remember the surname of a housemate until we went back to our original university 30 years later, and it suddenly came back.
Yeah, retrieval cues. So the example was like, you forgot the last name of a roommate she studied together with in 1984, and with a friend that by no means couldn't remember the last name, and then they visited the university again, and then we are not finished there, by the way. And then it came to mind. Okay, so I just want to briefly speak about the non-declarative. And probably one of the biggest parts here is procedural memory, which is about the skills and habits we have, like learning how to ride a bike and things like that. And there's one thing, one key finding here, which has been shown. If you want to learn a new procedural skill, playing golf or whatever, learning to ski or so, and there are often two different approaches of how to learn. Some people will try the so-called master practice, so you just do a lot in a short amount of time, or you can distribute your practice. You know, it's a difference even down to, well, if I have a lot of time, do I do 2 hours twice a day in separate sessions, or do I once for 4 hours? Or do I like 2 hours a day for 30 days, or 1 hour per day for 60 days? And what has been shown is that distributed practice is superior to master practice. Of course, if you have 30 days, it's best to train as much as possible. But if you say, okay, 60 hours of practice I can invest either in 15 days, 4 hours a day, or 30 days, 2 hours per day, then the 30 days are more effective. And the reason behind that is that for this type of learning, we have consolidation processes in the brain where we have changes in the synapses, which often, for instance, occur during night. And then we have the consolidation and the next time. And you may notice that if you learn something like that, for instance, you do a tennis course, learn it for the first time while you're on holidays, and you have every day a session. Next day when you start, you're often considerably better than you left off the day before. And that one reason for this is this consolidation during the night or during some break in between, which improves. Okay, now let's go back to our initial demonstration. Let's put away all your sheets where you have the city names and the animals on there, and let's see how you now remember the animals and cities. Yeah, if you put everything aside, just write down all the animal names you can remember. Oh, unfortunately, I don't have anything more. There are too many good people in the first round, so. Some people are really good, they are still writing. So, these were the animal names. please count how many you got right. Okay, same thing for the city names. Please write down all the city names you can remember. And try to use, again, the retrieval cues from whatever strategy you use to encode it. Okay, can we stay a little bit quieter, please? Okay, please also in the back row. So try to use the way you worked with the information to help you retrieve it. Just look at the screen, okay? And note how many you got right. Okay, and the last poll everywhere. Please go to poll everywhere and again note what did you remember better. And please don't answer according to social desirability and say, oh, he wants us to be better at cities, so we are. Good. Still, okay, sorry about that. Okay, so at least something. So it looks like this time, indeed, it's more cities are B, C, D, and E and F are more animal. So this hopefully then demonstrates that in particular for long-term memory, this is quite an advisable strategy to try to work with the information to encode. Okay, thanks a lot. See you next week.